Namaste, welcome back to my channel. This is Anvi Prabhu with you. So we are in the heart of Pride Month and one of Jordan Peterson's videos is making the rounds. And as usual, I had quite a lot of things to unpack from it. And so I'm here to share my thoughts with all of you all. Before we dive in, please make sure that you like the videos, share the videos, subscribe to my channel, and also press the notification icon so that you don't miss out on any of my future episodes. I think I'd like to start the video by saying that we live in a hypersensitive society, and just because somebody is critical about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are phobic about it. So if somebody is critical about the gender theory in the way that it is depicted today, doesn't mean that they are necessarily transphobic or any other phobic. Just because somebody is critical of the weather doesn't mean that they are rain phobic. It just means that they don't want the rain on their face every single minute of the day. And I feel that is what is happening in today's society. Most of the societal issues today are being pushed beyond a necessary point, in my opinion. And I feel that it is this over-victimization and the strain of this over-victimization that most of the people are tired of. Now, coming to the video, I have linked the entire video below. So if you haven't yet checked it out, please check it out. So the first point that Jordan Peterson makes is about the semantics of language itself, about how it is called pride and that pride is considered as a cardinal sin in Christianity, and also in almost all the religions that I know of, it is not considered as a virtue. And on the face of it, it does seem a very good point, very valid point. But I feel that we really need to dig in a bit more deeper. So we need to understand where actually pride began. So pride began after the Stonewall riots in New York. Stonewall was a very popular gay bar in Greenwich and it was frequently targeted by the authorities. On June 28th in 1969, there was a police raid in the early morning hours, after which there were massive uprisings and protests from the gay and lesbian community. And pride events eventually started to commemorate this incident. And this is the starting point of the pride activism that we see on a larger scale. So in view of this incident, you might somehow understand why the word pride would have made sense then. I think it almost becomes like a necessity to assert your pride in your individuality and your personality, the aspects of your identity, only when you perceive a threat to it or against it. It is about a sense of pride in one's own identity, a sense of dignity of being, and not being made to feel lesser or discriminated against. But taken in today's context where everything is hypersexualized, including children, pride events are unfortunately not what they were. In a majority of cases, pride events have become like a showcase of adults' sexual fantasies and kinks rather than a fight for equality. So what began as a very necessary fight for the dignity of a human being, of a human life, has now been boiled down to nothing but the bare minimum of a sexual aspect of a person. Being discriminated against because of sexuality is abhorrent, and like there is no two ways about that. And no person in any corner of the world should go through that. But to also take it to the other extreme, where like nothing else but your sexual identity matters and it is shoved down the throats of everyone, especially again, I say children, it's valid that it becomes questionable. So what is being said here is not that we shouldn't fight against inequality, but rather it is a huge question mark against the way that it is being fought. So the next point that Peterson goes into is that sexuality is a very private affair. And again, I agree in a very philosophical sense, but there is a but. If we lived in an idealized society where every single human being was on the same intellectual, emotional, and empathic level, then yes, everybody would have respected everybody else's private affairs, and we actually would not even have had to fight for freedom in any respect. And to me, it actually does seem very absurd that after all these thousands of years of history, human beings are still trying to figure out what freedom is, how much of freedom is necessary, how much of freedom should be given to whom and why and when. And if you really think about it, it is kind of absurd that we are still stuck in this loophole of questioning freedom. So coming back to the point, I do agree with Peterson that it is a very private affair and it should remain private. if it was an idealized society, but unfortunately it is not. And especially if you look at the history, LGBT people have had to suffer immense discrimination around the world. So, in that context, fighting for rights was a very necessary thing for the community because the society and the cultural barriers did not allow for these private things to be kept private. LGBT people were ostracized and jailed and even killed for this private affair. So, until the world reaches a point where, as I said, every single person is on the same intellectual, political, and empathic level, irrespective of religious beliefs and personal beliefs, and that these beliefs do not hinder somebody else's private matters, then yes, it can definitely and it should remain as private. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is that as a society, as a global society, have we all really reached that point? So even if you take it in the heterosexual paradigm, sexuality has not remained an entirely private affair. There are several and severe consequences, social consequences, political consequences, economic consequences, cultural consequences, even depending on who you choose to court, who you choose to have physical relations with, irrespective of whether that relation falls under the blanket of marriage or not. And we cannot ignore the fact that many LGBT couples have had to fight for social equality, economic equality, and rights in many aspects in many countries. So to say that, sexuality should remain a completely private affair, I feel is a very idealized hope, because as I said, even in the heterosexual paradigm, it is not a completely private affair. So you cannot expect the same to apply to the minority community. So maybe saying this is probably not the way to fight the over-sexualization of today's society. I think the way to go about it is that we have to make sure that all countries, and I mean all countries, have to give equal social, economic, and political rights to all couples, irrespective of whether they are straight or not. And maybe once we achieve that on a global scale, then we can allow it to be a private affair. If I'm right, Jordan Peterson also questions whether this Pride Month and this fight is still relevant, necessary in our times. And here I would partly agree with him that at least it is not necessary in the way that it is done. And I think that is where the majority of us have a problem with. This so-called fight for equality has become nothing but an affair of narcissism, to again borrow Peterson's words, rather than a meaningful protest to achieve a meaningful aim. It is overtaken as well by communities that have made, as Peterson says, sexual identity as their only identity. And this is a point on which I cannot agree more. Yes, freedom to be with whom you want to be and whom you want to marry, when it is between two consenting adults, it should be a no-brainer in any half-sane society. But then to make sexual desire as the only locus of a person's identity is laughable. I mean, humankind is deeper than that. Not to speak of what is happening to children with gender-affirming care. Yes, some children might go through, periods of confusion and questioning their identity, and that needs to be dealt with proper care and counseling and listening, rather than rushing them into gender-affirming care at the drop of a hat, and especially while hiding it from their parents, as I have seen and heard of in many cases. I mean, that is when it starts to seem like an agenda and is not an action inspired from empathy. Here again, I can only echo Peterson's sentiments where he's saying that what is happening is actually destroying the gay community. Being critical does not equal to being phobic, and I assert that again with all my might. Like, all the work that the gay community has done is now being washed down the drain by people who are willing to butcher children. It is exactly the same thing that is happening with the feminist movement. Like, all the work that has been done by the feminists all these years have been washed down the drain by people who are insistent on allowing men into women's sports, allowing men into women's bathrooms and other private places, and allowing men who have been convicted of rape into women's prisons. I'm sorry, but this is not the fight for equality or a voice for equality. This is literally killing the equality of opportunity in a very subversive and a very disturbing way. As a woman, I feel really sad that I have to think twice about calling myself a feminist in today's world. And all the struggles that women have had to go through are being unnecessarily trivialized. And I guess the saddest point is that nobody really knows what exactly the end point is, at least from what it seems from the outside. And as I said, I feel like most of the people are really surprised and unsure about the direction that this fighting for rights is taking all over the world. And nobody knows what exactly is being fought for, why it is being fought for, the way it is being fought for, and what exactly is the ultimate aim of all of it. Which is why it increasingly seems like it is all a medical agenda, a political agenda. And I feel like most of the youngsters in today's society need validation, because our society is unfortunately becoming more and more fast paced and more hollow and empty. And in that search for meaning and true identity and, some cause for life, some purpose, people are, especially younger people, are resorting to all of this. Again, I'm not saying that we've reached a perfect place where we don't need to fight for equality at all. But again, it's a huge question mark when you look at the way it is being fought, and also how it is affecting the society at large, and especially the children and the younger generation. Now, if it is acceptance and equality of everyone that continues to be the aim, then why not bring real reforms in countries where being gay is still punished by death? There are global religions that consider homosexuality as a sin. Now, have we truly reached a point where we can say that we will not allow those individual religious beliefs to hinder someone else's experience of life in society? If not, then why are we not doing anything against those countries? Why not look at transgender communities who perhaps are not tech savvy and not on social media gaining clout, but are facing genuine problems in society with regards to housing or education or any other matter? Why has this fight for equality become so superficial and arrogant that it is losing its value? And why not encourage everyone to be kinder and more accepting in real life than just on social media? Like, surgical transition of minors on the scale that it is being pushed is not the answer to help people feel like themselves. When these kind of things happen, it is inevitable and extremely unfortunate that the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and sometimes we really cannot do anything about it. And it is high time that our society, global society, heals from the inside out. Coming to the last point, which I picked up in Peterson's speech, it's his frustration with everything being politicized in today's world. And I personally cannot stress this enough, that we as a society will achieve nothing worthwhile by diminishing our intellectual abilities and other abilities just to accommodate sexual preferences. Yes, there is still work to be done in terms of eradicating discrimination, especially on religious grounds in many countries. But for the most part, as I said, people are really busy in today's lives. And if a community is protected by law in a country and there is awareness, which I think that the LGBT community has achieved in plenty in many countries now, compared to even 10 years before, then there is really no need to push it down everybody's throats at every instance possible. So the requirement for me to be considered as a kind person, as a person who believes in equality, shouldn't merely be on the fact of whether I have a pride flag in my car, whether I have a rainbow put on my profile on Instagram. I don't have to prove that by doing these superficial things. Yes, some of them are really meaningful symbols, have been meaningful symbols in history too. But again, we need to really question the validity in today's times and the need to continue using these the way that they are being used. There should be equality of opportunity for every single person, irrespective of race, gender, skin color, sexuality. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But it should not be turned into a guarantee of success merely based on these factors alone. We have to remember that when we do this, we are not actually giving equality and dignity to these communities, but rather we are taking away their dignity by indirectly saying that you are not worthy of merit on any other basis except on the basis of your, whether it is gender or sexuality or skin color. Yes, representation is important, but not by overtaking actual merit. It should be about equality of opportunity rather than, as I said, a guarantee of equality of success. So I think we really need to ask ourselves, whether we as a society on the global scale have really reached that idealistic point of view. Are we allowed to reach that idealistic point of view? And if not, how can we actually reach that space where all of this fighting for equality becomes unnecessary and people just live their lives and nothing else matters? We don't have to have intellectual debates on, as Peterson says, private affairs, because we would have transcended these and we would have gone on to other matters, more important matters, should I say. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on Jordan Peterson's speech, as well as on some of the points that I have raised here, and also your thoughts on the way our society is today and how exactly it should be, how you would want it to be, and what your hopes are for the future. Please join in the conversation. I would love to hear your thoughts and your views. And until next time, take care.